Good afternoon, everyone. Taiwan truckers threaten to blockade roads to reverse a policy from the government outdating trucks that are 14 years or older. I went down there, there's even tow trucks involved. You know, that's not going to get too much public support. It's all based on the Air Pollution Control Act, which was enacted due to the IPCC and the Paris Climate Agreement. And it really makes you think about the fragility of our just-in-time delivery system, politics aside. Now we have the world's largest shipping company collapsing, Amazon going on strike, non-delivery of goods. Jim Rogers says look for a crash later this year or next. U.S. launching World Trade Organization challenge against 5 nations. That blue line you see in the background was back in the 1800s when our global temperatures dropped 1 degree Celsius. That front red line is where we are. The solar activity is going to continue to decrease, and this is going to affect global crop yields. That yellow arrow, that's where we're going to go down from. And when the global forecast is a decrease of 40 million tons on total grains, well, you would just expect that with all the disruptions in the supply systems. But the weather fronts are intensifying, the magnetosphere is wandering further, these vortice events along the coast, it's just multiple after multiple after multiple water spouts along Italy, damaged crops from hail, every continent. And this grand solar minimum timeline, with all the distraction that you're seeing overlaying on top of this, perhaps in the media this is an explanation for your rising food prices. And this is one of those times thinking about supplementing your food supply. Microgreens and sprouts to grow, healthy and fun to grow them as well. And the Adapt 2030 TrueLeafMarket.com is below in the description box. You'll be able to find links to all of tonight's images and stories. Starting in Taipei, Sunday morning, at least 500 trucks, motorcycles, cars surrounded the blocks at the Environmental Protection Administration and caused a total stoppage to traffic. These are the images I took myself being there. Notice the tow trucks. Once you get tow trucks involved in your protest, none of the other stuff is going to get towed out of the way. They knew that for sure. They'd already seen what happened in Brazil, and they gave the government an ultimatum like, you get it done or we're going to start blockading stuff. And you know what? By the end of the afternoon, this policy was reversed. It was all about diesel trucks that were 14 years and older. They had to meet these new emission standards, which were unrealistic and unmeetable for any truck older than 14 years old. And then there would be an offer for a loan for a new truck. If you couldn't pass this new stringent standard, you either drive or you don't work. And the chant of the protest, old cars are innocent. You see how refurbished that engine is? That still will not pass the new standards that they're looking for. Picture the Environmental Protection Administration, Executive Yuan. This is where the truckers came, and they actually started to block off access. So if you turned right here, you could go down to that office. You couldn't get there because total blockade on that road, as well back to Xiaonanmen. But you can see the line of traffic was taking up all 3 lanes. They were very civil about it. They did leave the outside lane open for, emergency services, etc. But the threat was there enough, and that many people turned out, that they actually forced the government back on its hand for these new emission standards that can't be met by anything older than 15 years. Now, the truckers were saying we will stop the roads. And if that happens anywhere on the planet, that is an instant how many days of food are left in your city. Now back to this Air Pollution Control Act. It all stems from the signing of the Greenhouse Reduction Management Act to come into accord with the Paris Agreement and the UN Convention on Climate Change. With our favorite organization in there, the IPCC. Now, reading through Anna Hunt's article about how to get yourself out of the just-in-time delivery system. Bringing to the point here, most Americans don't realize you're dependent on just-in-time food that brings in things from industries, from farms, and from shipyards. The warehouse, the distribution, it all has about maybe 4 days supply of food. Now, what do you think could interrupt the just-in-time delivery system? The world's largest shipping company collapsing? And the trade war escalating, so what do you think would happen with the amount of traffic? Also, Amazon European workers on strike. How's that going to affect the just-in-time delivery system as well? Then you add into this, U.S. launches World Trade Organization challenge against 5 nations. And you got all these things stacking up in the news. It's incredible how the distraction factor is being spun into like higher gears at the moment. And then here we are, warns Trump trade wars often turn into real wars. And then if that's not bad enough, Jim Rogers warning of a crash later this year or next. And then what I didn't consider was museum, hospitals, university, financial firms closing or disappearing. Now add into all of this as just subset A of what I previously showed you. Since I've started this channel, Adapt 2030, I have said that as we get closer to the really intense food price rises, they're going to have to distract you with every news article that would seem Hollywood-esque. Because our global crop production relies on stable growing conditions, and one thing a grand solar minimum does not guarantee you are stable growing conditions. Colder temperatures as well. That blue line is the Dalton minimum. Early 1800s, the Earth's temperature average dropped 1 degree Celsius, and they had a very difficult time with crops. And here we are, the red line is our current time. We are matching that Dalton minimum heading into this. And forecast out for the next solar cycle 25, down to 50 sunspots. That yellow arrow is where we are and where we're going to decrease off of, based on the comparison which I just showed you in the red and the blue lines. And then take into consideration the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This is the total grains. I've even highlighted it in the orange box. Your total is record harvest. How are they predicting a 40 million ton fall in ending stocks? Are they already drawing out of there? So if this were really affecting grains that much, would there be other places in the world that are seeing, these massive floods across France? They're major grain producers in Europe. Hailstorms, losing vineyards, really intense. And then along the Italian coast, it has been waterspout like this after this for weeks. Sometimes there'll be 5 coming down at one time. Most incredible footage is coming out of Italy of the unusually high amount of waterspouts. And when I say that, some of those have even turned into what would be considered an EF2 tornado out over the water with intensity. And you got these hailstorms across the world at the moment. It's not just here in Italy along with all the waterspouts, but it is happening everywhere. So when you start to think about the amount of hail damage that's around the world, the fruit has been getting pelted with hail. There's such huge losses in vineyards and also orchards this year, vegetables. And now orchard growers are almost forced to have hail netting. It wasn't like that before. And as Jim Rogers was talking about in that article, bubbles are ready to burst. That'll lock up the just-in-time delivery system if the credit's not available. So that might very well turn into this, because if you have any of these cryptocurrencies and I'm a shipping company and you're a buyer and we also have the grower in the middle, we can transact amongst ourselves to get transactions and shipping done, even though banks or something happens to a country, whatever it is, a disruption of some sort where you're unable to access your funds. Also in times of panic, if it does create anything tumultuous in the stock market, people are going to run right here. If bubbles are bursting across the place and one is starting to rise, the money flows there. And what's interesting about all these events taking place, focused on how things might not get delivered, which would mean and explain away rising food prices to you. If there was all these disruptions in Amazon, in perhaps another carrier, shipping lines going out of business, trade wars in between. And when we look at the grand solar minimum forecast of intensity of more crop losses, And the taller the line, the more extreme the weather is going to become, and the less stable every season from this point forward will be when we plant and when we harvest. The news is in overdrive, and look at the uptick that is expected over these next 6 months and into 2019-20. We need to start talking about global crop losses. And regardless of which country you live in, you should really think about how your food's delivered to you and what you can do to give yourself a little buffer. That's just really interesting timing, the amplification of the grand solar minimum, and suddenly all these global and logistics and shipping problems overlay on top of this. Thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of the video. The graphs and charts, I'm putting everything up on Steemit in a written form now. So these videos are going to be turned into PDFs and also posted long with all the images and the text in case you like to read more than watch videos.